Hi, I'm Shervin, Associate Curator at the Petersen Automotive Museum, and I'm standing on top of the Petersen. We're going to do something different today. We're going to drive these two supercars 200 miles per hour on the 110 freeway. This is going to be very dangerous and very...
We're not doing that.
What? I thought we...
It's illegal to speed.
Oh, come on. Wouldn't it be cool to...
No, we are a museum. We don't do stunts here.
What about at night when no one's watching?
No.
Can I at least start one?
Bye.
Yes! No, we're not going to make an action movie, but considering the era that these two cars were made in, the 90s, it's kind of surprising how neither one was ever featured in one. But we're not here to talk about films, we're here to talk about cars. The 1993 Bugatti EB110 GT and the 1993 Jaguar XJ220, two supercars, 1 year. One common goal and two wildly different ways of achieving it. The Italians made this, and the English made this. But when I say Italians, I also sort of mean the French and the Germans. Let me explain. To those of you who have at least heard of Bugatti, you may be familiar with the Veyron or the Chiron or the classic Type 35. But what you may not know is that those, and this, were actually all made by three different companies that all just happened to be named Bugatti and really had nothing to do with each other except for the name. Bugatti was named after Mr. Bugatti. Ettore Bugatti was an Italian-born French car manufacturer who founded the company in 1909 in a place called Molsheim. Molsheim is part of France today, but it has at different points in history been a part of Germany. So that's what I meant by the Germans. Now, Mr. Bugatti was famous for his relentless perfectionism, his keen attention to detail, and his impeccable table manners. He's even said to have refused to sell a car to an aristocrat once, simply because the man didn't know how to properly use a fork and knife. Keep in mind, this is a man who designed his own silverware, so the bar was pretty high. The company was a success, but when Mr. Bugatti passed away in 1947, things began to go south quickly. The company was sold in 1963, but by that point, Bugatti hadn't been making cars for several years. Bugatti was dead. And so was his company. So that's the end of the story, right? Well, it was, for about 24 years. Until an Italian entrepreneur by the name of Romano Artioli bought the rights to the Bugatti name, taking it back to the country that it originated from. Why? Well, Artioli was already a successful businessman in the automotive game. He had operated one of the largest Ferrari dealerships in the world, and he was pretty well connected too. One of those connections was none other than Ferruccio Lamborghini. Yes, that Lamborghini. Mr. Lamborghini had already sold his company years before, but he saw another opportunity to jump back into the ring. And so Bugatti rose from the ashes, except this time in Italy, not Germany or France. Marcello Gandini, who had designed the famous Lamborghini Miura and the Countach, was brought on to design the prototype for this new venture, which would be called the EB110. EB for Ettore Bugatti and 110 for his 110th birthday, which at the time was just a few years away. Well, the new company wasted no time in pouring money into their new mission. They built a factory from scratch, finalized their designs, and launched the car to glorious fanfare, mostly their own. I mean, the extravaganza that they threw for this car's release would put presidential inaugurations to shame. It was incredibly lavish and decadent and self-congratulatory, but it also definitely made a statement. Bugatti was back. When you buy the rights to a brand name, you can basically do anything you want with it. It doesn't matter if the company was famous before, you don't have to stick to any pre-existing rules. But Artioli did anyway, and that's what's so interesting about this chapter in Bugatti's history. That there was such an amazing level of intention and faith in the original brand that it really was like the company was coming back to life for the 1990s, almost as if it had never died to begin with. The car itself was superb. Dramatic styling, scissor doors, beautiful colors, all-wheel drive, and a 3.5-liter V12 with not one, not two, not three, but four turbochargers to boost the output to 553 horsepower, making the car fly to 212.5 miles per hour, faster than you could finish your cannoli. All of that made it to a 6-speed manual transmission, which very few cars at the time had. By all accounts, this was a seriously impressive car. Meanwhile, some 1,600 kilometers away in England, Jaguar was making this. The Jaguar XJ220, the supercar of Great Britain. A man by the name of Tom Walkinshaw had approached Jaguar several years earlier to start a racing collaboration with his team, TWR. Now, TWR wasn't the only engineering firm out there, but it took a special type of talent to transform a cushy, grand touring luxury cruiser like the Jaguar XJS into a mean, growling track weapon. You know, like an actual Jaguar. TWR did it. Needless to say, the collaboration was a success, with a win at the 24 Hours of Le Mans and a series of one-off race cars built. But it had gotten to the point where even Jaguar's own leadership recognized the stark differences between what the company was racing and what they were offering to the public. They wanted to bridge that gap, and so, rather than end the racing program, they decided to make a street-legal supercar. But there wasn't enough support at first to dedicate to such a big project, so 12 volunteers at the company got together and formed the Saturday Club. So while John Hughes' characters in The Breakfast Club were bonding over Saturday detention, these guys were building the bones for a world-class supercar. Eventually, the concept car was completed. It had elegant bodywork, electrically operated scissor doors, all-wheel drive, something that Jaguar had never done before, and a 6.2-liter 48-valve V12 with dry sump lubrication. I mean, it basically was a race car for the road. And it would be called the XJ220. 220 meaning 220 miles per hour, a top speed that no production car in the world had ever gone before. When it was unveiled at the British International Motor Show in 1988, crowds rushed to Jaguar's stand with blank checks in hand, demanding for this car to become a reality. Jaguar was overwhelmed by the reaction and started to seriously consider whether they could make this into a real car. They decided to start taking orders and announced a limited production run of up to 350 cars. But demand quadrupled that, and around 1,500 deposits poured in, each of 50,000 pounds. Right, Jaguar said, and got to work. But dreams don't always mirror reality. Early on, Jaguar realized that they didn't have the resources to develop the production car themselves, so they had Jaguar Sport do it. That was the joint venture between Jaguar and TWR. Their sights were set on cars like the Porsche 959 and the Ferrari F40, two supercars that had held the world's attention for the past 2 years. Now, it's worth noting that even those pinnacle cars only had a 6-cylinder and a V8. Jaguar wanted to make a V12. Unfortunately, they hit a roadblock. They found out that it would be unfeasible because of weight and emissions restrictions, and also concerns about the tires being able to handle such heavy weight at such high speeds. And so the V12 turned into a V6, and the all-wheel drive turned into just rear-wheel drive. And the scissor doors also had to go, and the new V6 was based on the Austin Rover V64V engine, which had been used in the MG Metro 6R4 for Group B rally racing. Wait a minute, the MG Metro? The Austin Metro? My friend had a Metro in university. It was terrible. But right, this was the racing version for racing. Right. Okay. You can see where I'm going with this. Customers were livid. What was this, some sort of joke? They demanded their money back and desperately tried to get out of their pre-orders. They'd been promised a V12, and now instead they were going to be getting half of what they paid for. But Jaguar wasn't discouraged. They doubled down and made this V6 the very best it could be. It went from a naturally aspirated 3-liter to a twin-turbocharged 3.5-liter pumping out 542 horsepower, which was actually more than the 500 horsepower than the concept car had. And it went faster too. The original prototype, chassis number 4, reached a maximum of 212.3 miles per hour. The production version, 217.1 miles per hour. Both times, the XJ220 set the world record for the fastest production car. This big cat was no slouch after all. There was just one problem. It was called the XJ220, 220 as in the top speed, and it could only go 217. That was with both of the catalytic converters removed, by the way, and the rev limiter bumped up. Does it really count? So half the cylinders and still the fastest car in the world, but still not quite what it promised. Despite favorable press reviews upon its release, sales were very disappointing. The 1,500 or so cars that Jaguar expected to build turned into just 281, with some even going unsold for years. And that's the problem with naming your cars after their intended top speed, or their intended starting price, like DeLorean and the DMC-12, which was supposed to be $12,000. Reality just so rarely meets expectations. Mercedes-Benz has gotten away with this for years. The famous 6.9 only had 6.8 liters. The 560 SEL only had 5.5 liters, not 5.6. But for some reason, a 3-mile-per-hour difference with the XJ220 was just too much for early 90s buyers to handle, even despite being the fastest car in the world. I have a question for people who put down a deposit on these cars and then took it back. Would you really be able to tell the difference between 217 miles per hour and 220? Have you ever even gone 217 miles per hour? I never have, officer. By many accounts, these were both phenomenal cars. There was just one problem. The party they were going to was over before they even arrived. You see, these cars were both conceived during the late 80s, a time when the excess of that decade was still in full swing. But by the time the 90s had rolled around, the world was in a financial recession. And so the type of disposable income that would have been thrown at cars like these just a few years earlier was no longer there. Just 281 examples of the XJ220 were built, and Bugatti made only half that number, despite additional plans to make future passenger models that never materialized. Both cars were dead by 1995, and Bugatti was bankrupt. The irony is that today, in 2025, Bugatti is the one still making cars. But not that Bugatti. The rights to the Bugatti brand name were acquired by Volkswagen Group in 1998, and that's the version you know and love today, which has made cars like the Veyron and the Chiron and the Devo. As for the factory where the EB110 was made, it's still there, sitting empty and covered in dust. There are even calendars that are still open to September 1995, when the company ceased operations. And Jaguar is taking a cat nap. We'll see what the future holds for them. TWR, meanwhile, has come out with a resto-mod version of the famous XJS, the car that started their collaboration with Jaguar all those years ago. Who knows? Maybe they'll take an XJ220 and do something modern with it. We could look at these cars today as what could have been and what wasn't meant to be. But that's not really fair, is it? The reality is that they've both stood the test of time very nicely, and you can see how dedicated each manufacturer was to getting things right. If you drove up to Cars and Coffee with either one of these today, nobody would scoff. Nobody would say, hey, look, a 93 failure. Everyone loves these, and they're an important part of automotive history. You just can't make cars like this without passion, and we here at the Petersen think it shows. Thanks for watching another deep dive at the Petersen Automotive Museum. I'm Shervin. Join me next time when we drive these cars off the roof.
No, we can't do that.
It was worth a shot.